Okay, thank you everybody for coming. Welcome to our 20th webinar for 2021. It's our 94th since we started in March of 2020 of these webinars that we've been doing every week. We did them twice a week for a while, and now we've dropped down to about one a week every Thursday morning live at 10 a.m. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can catch us live Tuesday at 10 a.m. So these have been great. We've been having a good time. We've got another great guest today with us. Drew Wikstrom from Tachterion Driver Development is joining us. We've been doing a small little sub-series of driver coaching and what do driver coaches look for in the data and in the video, and then a little bit of the topic of actual coaching on top of it. But we do keep a focus on data and video, obviously, and some of the stuff that we kind of focus on here. So thank you, Drew, for coming. I appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and that's why we do these on Tuesday, so we can try to get some folks like you. So I appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, we're gonna have we'll have a good time. We've linked into the chat box over there. We've got Drew's business website, and then he races for a team that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. And there's the link to the team website as well. If you're watching this on YouTube later, if anything we talk about as far as links and attachments, anything we decide we're going to do that we talk about live, go down into the YouTube description box and you'll have all of the links there, including a document in a little bit. Just a delay in that, a few days at least, and of all the questions and answers that we'll have answered as well. All right, anything that was typed into the question and answer box, we type up the answers and put them in there as well. So that's where you can look if you're watching this on YouTube later. Okay, let's introduce Drew a little bit better and chat with and begin chatting with him. Drew, we brought him here because of he's a driver and professional coach, and I met Drew, gosh, it has to be 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. Yeah, the first time, and we chatted a little bit, and I joked as I was with myself as I was putting this together. I'm gonna jump back a slide, and you've got that face there looking at you, and you got this face here looking at you. I'm every time I see him, I run the other way first, right? Because he's mad at me or something. No, but he's a pretty intense guy when it comes to coaching and data. He takes this stuff fairly seriously, so it's kind of fun. He's lifelong motorsports enthusiast. Been around this a long time. Started racing autocross, PCA in the 90s. Quickly moved from that into HPDE type events, as it's a pretty typical way of things happening. Volunteer coach, helping people out, the heart of a teacher, and you can tell that with a lot of driver coaches. Just they really enjoy helping people out, and Drew is no exception with that. And then he really kind of stepped up his program when data and video, AIM being a piece of that, obviously, was just starting to kind of come along and become very affordable, and yet still very powerful and very helpful to work with. And so he became a coach helping people out, and that was pretty cool. But the one main reason that I wanted to bring Drew in for this little subset of driver coaching and looking at data and video is his primary focus. He does coach in the professional series and doing a little bit more of that, but he focuses a lot on club racers and advanced track day guys. And so we've had Thomas Merrill, and we had Mark Miller, and they spend a lot of time coaching on the professional side. And I really wanted somebody that does a little bit of that, certainly, but also does club racers and advanced track day guys. So that's another reason that we brought Drew in here today. And not only is he a good race car driver and racing the cars that we're showing here on the thing, but some of those clients that we've been working with as club racers and working their way up through and learning more and more and getting faster and faster are now transitioning into the professional series as well. So Drew is on that path of not just getting to drive around the fantastic northeast of the United States, where all those great tracks are. You guys just got a beautiful part of the country to live in if you're a race car, if you're into motorsports. But now he's on airplanes a lot, flying to tracks and to help people all over the country. So Drew, a little bit more about your background. How much driving do you do versus the coaching nowadays? Are you still getting behind the wheel as much as you would like, or is there always wishing to have a little bit more?
Well, I mean, you always wish to have a little bit more, right? What's the most limiting thing in motorsports is the ability to get track time. But my ability to race in endurance racing and AER with random vandals gives me pretty significant seat time, right? Because each stint is anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes long, and I'm usually doing 3 of those a weekend, plus whatever we do on the test day or practice and qualifying. But you know, more is always better.
Yeah. Oh, and if when you're such an enthusiast, obviously, you're always wanting more. But what's cool about endurance racing is folks that do autocross or HPDE or even club racing, in one weekend at an AER event, right? You do more than most of those guys are doing in a couple of years of actual seat time. So, endurance racing is just a blast to me. There's a whole nother element. It's not just going fast. It's everything that goes around with it as on top of it. So it's pretty cool. You guys do really well, right? With the Random Vandals team, you do you win some races. You do pretty good.
Yeah, we don't complain. The car's in the top class, right? So that's sort of an unlimited section for what they have there. And the M4 GT4. When we originally brought it, we thought we were bringing the big gun, and then somebody shows up with a 500 horsepower Mustang, or the last time we raced there was an R8, GT3 car, which of course is even faster than our M4 GT4. And you got to race whatever you got to race against. But the big thing is always just all the seat time. And what I like about endurance racing is I like the team aspect, right? Because we're not trying to beat each other. We're just trying to collectively get faster so that our delta between drivers is as small as possible. And not just that, the whole team has to work together in addition, right? All the pit crew, right? Right down to the person who had to make the hotel reservations. And all of that has then transferred over to a couple of our drivers at Random Vandals are doing SRO GT4 America. And so we're taking that whole thing and moving over to there where it's a much higher stress environment with much less track time.
It was kind of a funny little story, the way that we've always thought about endurance racing. When I haven't done a ton of it, but we have the 25-hour Thunder Hill on here or on our coast, and a couple of other 12-hour events that we can go to. And when I was helping do strategy with a couple of teams, when we did 5 or 6 of the 25-hour Thunder Hills in a row, we had a rule, and the rule was in order to keep people, it was a team sport, just as you just mentioned, and in order to keep it that way from the driver's standpoint, the driver who turned the fastest lap had to buy dinner after the event, and unless that fastest lap came in the last 4 hours, we just had this rule which said, in other words, we were trying to enforce that speed is not what it is unless you're asked to do it, right? Once you're asked to do it, yeah, let's go. But before then, all 4 tires stay on the pavement, and you run up to that 10 or 15% back from what the car can actually do, right? And consistently, and when we ask you, then that bet is off, right? So that was kind of a way that we tried to make it as much of a team sport as possible.
So, I think the interesting thing about modern endurance racing, even the street tire type endurance racing, is just like what you see on TV with, IMSA, et cetera. It's now like an 8-hour sprint race. If you're not gunning as fast as that thing can go, as fast as you're capable as a team in a car combination, you're not going to be at the front at the end. It's astounding to me the kind of abuse these tires can take.
And that's probably true. My method was 4 or 5 years ago that I'm talking about. It's probably, and the cars are so good now and the tires are so good that that probably wouldn't hold true anymore, right? The couple of questions we've got started right off, and let's jump into them. The first one, Jeff Wasilko asks, and I'll answer this one, Drew. But Drew, have you started using? Well, you can answer too, but have you started to use Race Studio 3 beta analysis? If so, how do you find that works? Do you work in both of them? Drew and I actually chatted about that, what we're going to use today, as after the first 10 or 15 minutes here, maybe 20, we're going to jump in and analyze data, obviously. And the question is, well, how should we do that? And Drew hasn't played a ton with Race Studio 3 analysis, and I wished to keep this inside of Race Studio 2. So you have anything to add to that, Drew, on your experience with Race Studio 3?
Yeah, I'm gonna go visit Jeff Wasilko so he can teach me how Race Studio 3 beta works.
Haven't played with it much at all. So
yeah, no, I should have been doing it over the winter, but I decided to go skiing instead. And all of a sudden I got really busy, and then my opportunity window to sort of learn RS3 beta just vanished. So I'll get there as soon as I have a couple of week window where I can actually sit down and look through it, and I'll make it happen, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I've been wanting for a long time. The video integration for one is absolutely critical, and everybody that I've spoken to, especially what I'll call non-power users who have played with it, are like, it's so much more intuitive. And so, that's the kind of thing we're looking for. So I'm really excited to get to it. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Well, I know our friend who is on the back end of this, Emiliano from the software team in Italy, loves to hear that, and I hear the same thing from a lot of people. Is yes, it's intuitive, but if you have previous Race Studio 2 knowledge, you can look at it and find your way, because it's similar enough that you would know where to go and look, but just enhanced, so much better in order to make it easier to use. So it's almost that perfect balance, which is kind of nice. But for today, we're not going to do that. We're going to look at our stuff inside of Race Studio 2. A couple of questions I always ask, Drew, that when we were chatting with professional driver coaches and looking at data and video. The first one, how do you prepare? You're coming up for a weekend and or a test day or whatever it happens to be, and you've got somebody that's called you, not worked with them before. What do you, and I ask this question just to help those in our audience that may be looking for coaches, and it helps them prepare themselves better from the other end of this relationship, right? What do you typically prepare to do to prepare to have a good, clean, easy session with a new client?
Well, I mean, the primary thing is, have a phone conversation ahead of time so that expectations are managed, right? Lay out, these are the things that I do. Also try to find out what is that driver expecting of me or of the situation, to make sure that, what I'm able to offer is what they actually think they're going to get. The worst thing in the world is to show up and have the driver expect one thing and me expect another thing, and then nothing is going to work out well that way. The level of driver prep, sort of what I'll call, pre-event homework, is entirely dictated by what driver I'm working with. If I've got a lower level driver who doesn't have a lot of experience, not a novice, because there's plenty of people who can work with a novice, but your intermediate solo drivers who are kind of in a plateau, a lot of times I actually won't give them any homework to do, because I don't want them to get their expectations all ramped up looking at some video of me driving or some other driver driving, and then try to go out and duplicate that if they don't have the skill set for it. So in the case of a drivers that are, just in a plateau in that intermediate to advanced level, I actually will show up and have the driver be relatively cold as far as what I've given them to prepare for, so I can see what they need. Because a lot of times, even if they send me a video ahead of time, you're not really sure exactly what that driver's capabilities are based upon the videos. A lot of times you're just getting a YouTube, or not a YouTube video, but just like a GoPro type video, some sort of hero camera with no telemetry on it. And it may look exciting, but you're not really sure what's going on there. You need that data to provide the context to that scenario. So for those environments, I will first thing I do when I get to the track is get the driver guys can calm down. We get video and data in the car if they don't already have it. And then we go out for a nice cruise at, however fast that driver's comfortable driving me around with. And I'm doing a lot less of me getting in the passenger seat of the car these days, but especially if it's a new client, I need to do at least one session inside the car so I can understand one-on-one, what is this driver doing and how are they doing it, right? What's their style? What's their, how are they thinking about it? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's that whole right seat thing for a driver coach. That's been a discussion for the last 10 years or so, whatever. But if you go back out there and you're not running it at super high rates, right, just to get the good feel, the driver's running at 70% or 80%, I might do something. But boy, when they start going fast, I'm not sure that would be something for me. But people have different things.
Exactly. And in particular, just, I'm not a small guy. I'm, the husky side of a husky. So, you're not going to turn a fast lap with 250 pounds of driver coach in the car, right? That's not the goal of me getting in the car. The goal of me getting in the car is to just get a real firsthand account of the way you do your control inputs and see some things that maybe I wouldn't quite catch as quickly just by looking at video and data. But again,
Yeah.
for the most part, I try to not be in the car because it's distracting to the driver
Yeah.
who's trying to learn, right? And it also, negatively impacts the performance of the car. So trying to, not be in the car as much as possible.
Yeah, being able just to see the hands and watching moving their hands on the steering wheel from the shifter back up and down, and and the nervousness of all of that, seeing it firsthand probably is worth a little bit of effort. You have data and video now. If you get from a driver, what are your most important tools? And looking at it from two different ways. Number one, from the data versus video, how are you going to go to work, right, with the tools? And then once we talk about that, then inside of the data, what are tools that are important to you? Typically we're going to have some sort of either a solo or a nicer aim device, maybe with some channels, but you've got your speeds and G's and steering. What's your order of channels that are really important to you once you get into the data?
So my go-to channel, of course, is going to be the speed channel. The GPS speed channel it's the money channel. If you have no other channel and you have that channel, you can still tell an awful lot. You can look at deceleration rates, obviously mid-corner speeds. Just the shape of the graph will tell you, how good the pedal transitions are going from brake to throttle and throttle back to brake and so on and so forth. Without that channel, all you've got is a bunch of noise. And then, I spend a lot of time in cars that don't have a lot of sensors. So, the very next thing, if I don't have a brake pressure channel, the very next thing is going to be the longitudinal G-force graph, which you can get either, even in a regular basic solo, you can get that just from the GPS portion. If I have sensors, my go-tos are going to be speed, then throttle, then brake, and then steering angle if it's available. And then, we'll lay things over top of those to see what what the drivers are doing.
In which we're going to look at some data and kind of prove that out, kind of how you set it up, and take a look at it here in a moment. So interesting. The another couple of questions that I really like to understand is you're a driver coach. You're coaching folks all the way from that brand new driver that you just talked about. Maybe they have a little bit of some time, but you have focused in the past on club racers and advanced track day guys, and now professionals. Do you coach all three of those levels the same, or is there a difference? You always hear, there might be a driver school line, or maybe a brake earlier and throttle up a little bit earlier, move the whole corner ahead a little bit. What's your coaching method when it comes to the different levels of your student?
So different levels of where people are at as far as their driving skills, to me, is actually different than different levels of where they're at as far as their driving career, right? And their understanding of data, for instance, right? So if I have some drivers where we're going to do everything by video, because squiggly lines to them are just squiggly lines. But the primary thing that I see distinctively between, sort of your intermediate level track day driver versus your beginning club racer versus your, championship winning club racer is going to be the ability to take what we see in the data and convert it into action, right? Biggest problem with lower level drivers is they become a slave to the school driving line, whatever that school was, whether it was their local club or, whether it was a driving school or whatever it is, they get stuck in this world of the line, and they can't deviate from the line, and they must drive the line. And the moment you go wheel to wheel racing, there is no line, right? I mean, that's not entirely true. Obviously, there is a most efficient way around the racetrack, but you have to be able to drive the whole racetrack and drive that corner how you arrived at it. And so the biggest thing I struggle with the lower level drivers is to get them to move the car out of whatever position that they're habitually driving, so they can actually start driving instead of just doing things by habit, right? And then that habit of that line, that is the most difficult thing to break. They get stuck with it. Even drivers who are moving up into professional series, if you happen to go out to a test day and there happen to be cones out there, they will unconsciously drive from cone to cone to cone, because that's what they've been taught to do. It's a very, very difficult thing to break.
Yeah, but it's the little bit I've done either coaching or as I learned how to race back in the Stone Age. You can get fast, right? But with some testing, either with coaching or when you're by yourself, you can get this fast. You can get the lap time, but that's now you're halfway there, right? And as a driver, as somebody that hasn't grown up in the sport or hasn't been around in a long time, you don't even realize that there's a difference between going fast and then racing fast, and being able to move the car around and be able to pass somebody that you're barely faster than or the same speed as, right? And that's interesting that you break it down that way, and that's something you keep an eye on and are ready to coach, right? It's that driver A may still be in that just getting up to speed piece, and then driver B is got a handle on that a little bit. Now you're trying to teach them how to modify their line and do some different things. So I like that. What about video camera placement? As you got your Smarty Cam or your other video cameras that you might place in there. It's a question that we like to ask a little bit. The driver it's nice if your client shows up and has the cameras mounted and everything. Where do you like it? Do you like it up at the base of the windshield so you got a good view out the outside? Do you want the driver in there somehow? Do you want to see hands and feet as well as as the track? What do you like the most from a driving coaching standpoint?
So if I only have one camera, hopefully it's a Smarty Cam because it's the most useful tool. Mm-hmm. That camera in every single car I coach with, even if it shows up and it's not in where I want it, I will put it dead center in the middle of the car at the driver's height of their eyes, preferably about as far forward in the car as their head really is, so that the natural view out of the windshield with a 67-degree Smarty Cam, for instance, looks to the driver like, in the video, like what they see out the car. And I try to make it so I can see the hands. And if the car's a manual gearbox, try to see at least the top of the shifter so I can see what the driver's doing, how fast they're shifting and so on and so forth. And just their attitude on the controls. Yeah. It's super, super important to be able to see that stuff, because not only for me as the coach trying to interpret what they're doing and give them feedback, especially if I've also driven the car so I can, lay video side by side, but a lot of people just, because they understand what they think they're doing in the car, when they see what they're actually doing in the car, that's when you kind of get that aha moment. How many times does a driver come back and say, "Oh, I was flat here," or I had perfect hands, nice steady hands through this corner. You come back and they're sawing at the wheel and they're like, "I swear I wasn't doing that." Yeah. But here you are, right?
Racing. There's so much happening in the cars, and that's where I have really found data to be super helpful. Video the same, obviously. That they're 100% focused. They're down to just understanding what they're doing, and they don't even realize how much was going on around them, and they were correcting for you. You're right, I think so.
Yeah, and the thing to me is that, like, when you have a video is context, but there's not much information there. And when you have data, you have a lot of information, but there's no context. It's when you marry the two of them together that it becomes powerful, right? When I can look at a lap of data and I can see the driver was slow in some corner, but if I don't know what was going on in the corner at a given time, especially if you're in a multi-class environment or a track day where there may be a lot of traffic, you might have to, judge a driver's performance by splitting up into a bunch of sectors so you can actually put a lap together, because they never get a clean lap. So it's super important to have the telemetry laid on the video and then be able to go back and dig down deep in the analysis software to see what the minutiae of the control inputs were, especially for the things you can't see, like the feet.
And even sometimes in the data, you can see a lot of that, but there are some instances that caught me out a couple of times when I was working with some people just on the data side. It was an endurance race, and people are going at it and having, a lot of different classes, just like you mentioned, a lot of different driver levels, fairly new guys and some experienced ones. And there was a corner that people continued to go in there and throw rocks up on the corner. And that was one where if I didn't have the video, I wouldn't realize that the grass and the rocks that it took a lap or two to get that cleaned off every time somebody would dive through the corner. And the video really, really helped on that part of it as well. So
yes, absolutely.
You can kind of see in the data when somebody's slowing down for a car, but when the track conditions change, that 10 or 15%, that's harder to see than backing off of the throttle for a car. There's a couple of questions here I'd like to go ahead and jump in on. Some of them are a little bit detailed, but we'll we'll let you start the answer. Maybe they can chat with you later. But Jason asked the question on that BMW M4 GT4, that gorgeous car that we've got pictured here. Which tune or power stick is being used? Are there additional sensors available? You're going to see data from that car in just a moment, so you'll get an idea of what's in there. But anything with AIM in particular, you have found super helpful in working with that car from the tune side, suspension setting, tuning. I'm assuming the stock AIM system is still being used. MXG, I think, is what's in the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we will be looking at that data in just a moment. But is there anything else you could add there before we move on?
I mean, just to get directly to the question, the power stick for the SRO car, which is I do not drive in the GT4 series. That's there. I'm just a worker bee. That whatever power stick we run there is dictated by the series based on BOP, and it's usually one of the lower power sticks. In the realm of the other car that we race in AER, that one will be dependent upon who else shows up and how fast we really need to go to compete with them. So if the R8 GT3 car shows up, we need to put a bigger stick in than if our competition is something slower. That's actually just a team strategy scenario at that point, and because we're in the top class, we don't have to worry about a power to weight scenario in AER. If we switched over to another series where it's power to weight, then obviously we'd have to run whatever was appropriate for that. As far as the sensors and whatnot in the M4, it's a standard MXG, not a 1.2 version, a standard one, but it has a custom firmware just for that car. So it integrates directly with nearly every sensor in the car. A lot of which are really more for engine health and whatnot, and so I'm not using significantly more of them than I normally would on, let's say, a Spec E46.
We always have those instances where it's a test day and all of a sudden the car's got a little bit of a misfire or something, and you got a lot of data you can look for vehicle health stuff, right? But your normal coaching stuff is a lot of the same channels you normally would, but there's a lot there to work with if you have to. So
exactly.
David Arkin has a question there that I just love that that I think I'll ask. David grew up in dirt roads where you're usually looking out the side window, right? He says he finds younger drivers that are very uncomfortable with a car that is not absolutely planted, a car that with good tires and stuff that we're used to a little bit more these days, not the old bias ply tires, right? And I believe that hinders their development. What is your experience with some of these younger drivers that do not like a loose car at all?
Yeah, so I haven't had that problem in particular with younger drivers per se, although I can see how you might get that if you've got guys that are coming from, let's say carts that are really grippy and stuff like that, where there just isn't a lot of slip angle. But I do get it a lot just with people who are not comfortable on limit. And when I grew up, my cars didn't have a whole lot of grip because the tires weren't what they are now. But I grew up in New England, and so driving around sideways in the snow was something we did for fun because we didn't have iPhones back then, and we barely had internet. So we had a huge autocross contingent up here. There was a time in my life where a buddy of mine and I were doing 3 autocrosses a month for a couple of years straight. Wow. And there's no better way to learn car control than to go out into an empty parking lot and smash a bunch of cones. And a lot of times people are showing up in the sport, especially in the track days, and they've got very powerful cars with very capable electronics, and they just don't have any idea what it's like to drive a car, over the tire's grip limit. And sometimes we just have to work within those parameters and keep the driver, all the nannies have to stay on, and that's what we can work with. And other times I can convince a driver to go out and buy something like an E46 or an E36 BMW and put some crappy tires on it and go out there and, do some autocross or do a car control clinic. I mean, the problem with autocross I've always found is the limited amount of time you get on track for the day you spend doing it. And so a lot of the clubs have started to recognize this and start putting together car control clinics where you're getting lots and lots of laps on an autocross course. And I think that's a really, really useful thing that people need to do, especially as they're coming up through the track day environment into the club racing scenario.
The customer drives the direction, right? The kind of speaking on that same topic, Charles had a question there. For the purpose of coaching students in HPDEs, in that environment where it's more of a street car, what is your opinion on keeping the driver's aids on or off? You mentioned it a little bit there, but let's focus in just a little bit more. Do you basically just leave the car alone and let them learn with what they have, or you try to turn off as much as you can?
It's highly dependent on the car. If you've got, let's say, a new Porsche GT3 RS as an example, like a 2016 level car, that car in the sport mode allows you 8 degrees of slip before it intervenes. There is no reason in the universe to turn that thing off.
Yeah, it's very good
None
too,
at all.
right?
It's
Yeah.
very, very good, and it is not in your way.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you've got a 330i BMW from the model year 2000, the car is undrivable with the traction control system on. It's just simply, you can't get it around the racetrack in anything that resembles
it's fighting you more than helping you.
It's, yeah, I mean, any kind of steering input with any kind of throttle, and the car's just, it's cutting the fun party off. So but again, those are two radically different types of cars, right? If you've got an E36 or an E46, you don't have the same potential for injury or damage, or not even remotely close to top speed. And so it's a much safer thing to place on limit than a car with 500 horsepower.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good. I think your approach is correct there. Obviously, and a lot of those older ones as well. Even if you turn the switch to off, the nannies are still working in the background. Even though I've had some rental cars. Not to chat about it on here, but maybe you're driving around a little bit and on a gravel road, and you try to let the car move around a little bit, and it stops it, right? It stops itself. So you turn off all of the stuff and you do it, and it still is there, right? There's a little bit of that always happening, even if you tell it you don't want it on. So
there's usually a trick for that. Just one more thing on that point is that's a
don't want to talk about those tricks. Yeah.
No, we're not going to talk about that trick. What I was going to say is, for me, the cars with the more advanced traction control system, I use it as a teaching tool as long as you can make the driver aware that they're bumping into it, right? If the driver is aware that if that system was not there, that they potentially would have put the car off or damaged it, you can use it as a tool to help push the driver forward. But again, that's a case-by-case basis. Yeah. Very, 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 very case-by-case. If I've got a driver who's on the cusp of figuring it out, right, then we'll start pushing those limits. If I've got a driver where they just want to get around the racetrack safely and do it proficiently and nicely and cleanly, that's not even a discussion we have. So again, very, very, customer dependent.
But these high-end cars that have really good systems in it, that is a great tool. You're a driver coach, you're helping them work up to this, and
yes.
And all of a sudden they start to feel it, and you've been telling them that they're getting closer, and then they feel it. That's just another tool in the toolbox, right, to help them understand what's going on. Great point.
Yeah, and I find there's two types of drivers. They're the ones that you can get them to understand that they need to stay within this envelope, right? And then there's another type of driver who's just out there banging around on the stability system like bumper cars, right? As if they're driving a video game. And those two drivers require a very, very different mindset. And the problem with driver number two, who's bouncing off the stability control system, is they have so little awareness of what's going on at the tire. It's very, very hard to teach them in that kind of car, right? That's the kind of driver you really want to put them in, like a go-kart or like a 944 spec car, right, with like 120 wheel horsepower and low grip tires.
Spec me on it. And if a driver starts doing that with Drew, and you keep bumping around and just having fun with that, you end up with that look there all the time, right? We don't want that. So no. Let's jump into some data. There's a couple questions left. I see them. We'll be putting those in. Please continue with the questions as you go. But we are a data analysis webinar, so we like to get in here and take a look at some data as well. So let me bring up some data. I'll set the stage a little bit, Drew, and then I'll run the mouse and you help. We're just going to walk a lap and kind of walk around. We have a coach and a client here. We've got some data, and let's just kind of talk about how you look at data and what how you would coach this particular session if this had just happened. The Watkins Glen, the track, as you can tell by the track map there. What we've got is a lap from a coach and a lap from a client, and I've got it set up as a per lap color. So the coach is the red line, the yellow line is the client, and the way we've got this set up is kind of something the way that Drew likes to normally set up his stuff. So I've followed his way of looking at it. GPS speed across the top. Speed is the money channel. Drew used the word a little bit earlier. It's something I've been teaching for 12 or 15 years now, right? So when he said that, a little proud here in my chest here, but then you've got the brake pressure. and then bumping up against that, and you can talk about why you do this, but bumping right up against that is the pedal, the throttle pedal. And then the next one down, the fourth box across the bottom there, is the yaw and steering, kind of a handling, kind of a channel, and then a gear position, just so we can see what the driver is doing. So give us a little feedback on why you set your screen up like this, and then let's kind of make a walk around a lap of Watkins.
Yeah, so just basic screen setup. This is just the way that my brain likes to look at things, right? The speed across the lap will, and just looking at the peaks and valleys and the shapes of the peaks and valleys will instantly give me a read on the next thing I need to look at, right? Usually the next thing I'm going to look at is actually not the throttle, it's the brake. Because a lot of times what I see, and we can actually zoom in on turn one. Oh, excuse me about that phone ball in the background, is I see a lot of drivers will be using, sorry about that, too much brake towards the end of the brake zone.
Okay.
In this case, that's not so much what we see. We just see a driver with a little bit longer brake than the coach, okay? But a lot of times when you start looking at these things, that's the kind of thing you're gonna see, is you'll see you know, kind of towards the end of the brake zone in particular, you won't see a clean release out of the pedal. This one is obviously not too bad, but that's one of the things I really, really look for, is a driver will have, especially if they start getting good at late braking, they'll tend to go really, really late, and then they'll hold their maximum brake pressure for too long down into the end of the brake zone.
Okay.
Right.
We chatted, we had last week, a week ago right now, we had Ian Berwick from Padgett Brakes on, and we talked a little bit about brake trace shapes and how that varies between ABS and non, and then different brake pads and all of these things. What's interesting here is the shape is fairly similar. You've either worked with them a lot already, or this is it gets right to the ABS side, and the car is doing what it needs to do. But you can see the quick buildup, and then both of you, as the pads get that initial bite, you can see that it's dropping down, kind of flatlining here a little bit, and then coming off as you get down towards the apex. Is that kind of what you see as well?
Yeah, exactly. And then the primary change there, the difference between the two drivers is, one of them just held throttle a little bit longer, and one of those drivers is right foot braking, and the other one is left foot braking. You can tell by the overlap on the yellow lap that driver is left foot braking, right? Because the brake actually comes up before the throttle drops off. And so the reason that I put the brake and the throttle together is so I don't have to really think about what the pedal transition is. I can just see it right there. Throttle off, brake on, and where do those two lines deviate?
Yeah, he's up to 60% of throttle, and he's already at 200, almost 300 psi of brake pedal, right? So clearly a left foot braker, right? There you go.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. And then coming back onto the throttle.
Right. So the other thing one of the things that, and you and I discussed this the other day, that I keep running into is, as drivers get to that higher level where they're a fast club racer, so they're consistently at the front in club racing. Because why? Because they're driving the tires out on this as close to the limit as is reasonable, right? And now the real nitty gritty of the technique comes in. And so one of the things I see drivers do a lot of times is they will fail to use enough steering in the middle of the corner to get the car to finish turning or finish its yaw moment. If you look down at the steering trace, you'll see that I'm actually adding more steering, or excuse me, the coach is adding more steering down there right as the throttle comes up to full. This is something you can do in this particular corner because topographically there's a big compression right at the apex. But you'll see, if you zoom back out, there's a theme that where the coach there has the higher minimum corner speeds and is back to throttle slightly earlier. There's also more steering angle being used right in the middle of the corner to get the rotation of the car finished, right? So that you can open your hand sooner and get to power earlier. And one of the things I work with the Spec 46 national champion, and one of the things that was apparent back in 2019 that we needed to really work on is he could drive the wheels off the car, he can drive the tires. He was like Cole Trickle in a certain way, right? There's just nothing he can't do in a race car, except he kept over driving the front of the corner and he was late getting back to throttle. So back in 2019, we really started working on those kinds of things to improve his skill set. That's continued up to this day. And it's a common theme I see right, with drivers who are already driving at a very high level, but they just can't quite get there either to the top step of their club racing podium, or they've moved on to a Trans Am or an SRO, and they're right there, but they're not quite at the top. And you know, in some cases, having seen some professional driver data, what I'll see is actually the pro driver will actually be a couple of miles an hour slower in the middle of the corner in an effort to get the car turned so they can get their hands open and get back to throttle as fast as possible. This is a primary thing I'm really looking for with the faster drivers, not so much with the lower level drivers, but with the faster drivers, that's a primary thing that we're looking for.
But the lower level driver is you're setting the trend of how you drive as they get better and better, right? And one of the things I'll use this one right here as an example. Something I learned with my son as he came through karts where he had a lot of grip, and then boom, he's in a car, right? And he's never driven anything with suspension, and being able to move that platform around. And what he was trying to do was trying to charge the early part of the corner, just as you mentioned. And what we had to work on was exactly what you've done here, is the faster you can get off the brake and let the car, you know, not absolutely load that front outside tires. You're turning in already, and you're still on the brake, so it's even loading it more. Of course, the car can't accept any steering at that point. If it does, it's just going to understeer. So the point of moving this all back a little bit, or if possible yet, even get more of the braking done earlier in the same time frame. But that's a skill. But you're getting off of the brake, which is allowing the physics to start to push some weight back and allow that front tire to even be able to handle that extra load of getting back on the throttle. So you mentioned it yesterday. We didn't go into it this deeply yesterday at all, but boy, that really helps that piece. And your driver that you say that's the only part he's struggling with, is because he's fast already, right? And he's too fast at that exact spot of the track. So it's
Exactly.
interesting. And they didn't come here to listen to me though, right? So you're walking down through here. There's a little bit that obviously there's something here going up through the S's at Watkins Glen with the yellow driver, yep. Right?
That's pucker factor.
Exactly.
This is the climbing S's. It's a high risk, high reward section of the track. Ultimately, the car is capable of going through there flat, but you got to really, really ease into it. And so there's later data from this driver where he was going through there full chat, and it was no big deal. This is actually a good set of data to look at, because this was the data I used to coach him to then do better the following day. And he did significantly better the following day.
Yeah. But that's part of your coaching, right? Is to work him up, right, but still be safe as you go.
Right.
Understand.
Exactly. The trick is to, I need, 2 more miles an hour here or 2 more miles an hour there. I don't need 6. Right? Because 6 might be the difference between I made the corner and I put it in the wall. Where 2 miles an hour, if we go 2 miles an hour too many, is the difference between I missed the apex, right? Not I missed the wall. So one of the big things is, just because you brought it up, is the incremental change that you're looking for, especially once a driver is fast, is very small. And if the delta time you can see in here, the big money on this lap, where the missing time is the bus stop and the carousel, right? So the inner loop and the outer loop, as people call it. That was the big place where the giant amount of speed was missing, right? So we spent most of our time just trying to figure that out, because that was the biggest delta in the lap.
And I have not made this little this 45-second pitch here for a while. Let me make it. This data is proving it. A thought process I have about where to go search and hunt for lap time, and this data is showing it perfectly. So I'm gonna take this opportunity. Here we are at 120 miles an hour up to about 140, where this driver has just rolled out of the throttle to about 40% and back in to settle the car, make sure it's right, make sure you make it through the uphill S's, and we are also tuned in to being full throttle in certain spots on the track. It's a goal, and but look at the amount of time lost. If we come back down here to this time compare bar, and here where the driver started to separate, if we go all the way back to right where he lifted, right, he's 3/10 behind. Right, the first turn he lost in braking zone, he lost about 3/10, and we come through this entire thing to back to where we would want to go all the way, but we'll stop in the middle first, right where he gets back up to throttle. He has lost 17 hundredths, a little less than 0.2 of a second through this piece where he was off the throttle. And that continues on a little bit. So let's take it all the way up to here. And by the time he gets to the end, he's lost only, a couple of, 50 to what was it? 50 to 30. So he's really only lost 2/10 in saving the car, taking a little bit of time, getting used to it. Then you look at and we can see this big speed trace difference. Look at this speed trace difference down here. Maybe in a couple of these, it's even similar, but look at the difference in the time compare bar. And this is how I like people to think about this. The time compare bar, a speed difference at 120 miles an hour versus a corner at 35 miles per hour. You can roll out, and because of the percentages of differences aren't that great at a high speed, kink or a chicane that you're rolling through really at high speeds, you can back off a little bit and not lose that much speed, because 120 versus 117 miles an hour at this spot on the track is not giving you a huge loss of time. But boy, if you're 3 miles an hour slower in a slow corner, since it's slow, it really multiplies the lap time loss. So what I always did, Drew, now I'll be handing it back over to you, is, and you already said it, but boy, you focus on the low speed stuff. That's where the big changes in lap time happens. And then you start to work on the higher speed and the higher speed and the higher speed. And you end up, that's where you're not making a ton of lap time gain, but that last little bit, and a whole lot easier on tires and some other things. So,
well, and as one of my clients likes to say, he loves his Star Wars references, in a high risk, high reward corner where it's also high speed, right? Because that's usually those three things happen together. Sometimes these are not the tenths you're looking for, right?
And they're only hundreds or tenths, and there's half a seconds to be found at slow corners.
Right, exactly. And you look at a place like VIR, you don't have to be maximum full chat up the climbing S's if you're not comfortable. And none of it matters anyway if you were slow getting out of 4A, 4B, and 5A, right? Because it's essentially a straightaway. You don't need to do 100 miles an hour through turn 10 if there's low-hanging fruit to be found in the brake zone on the way into the roller coaster, or just mid-corner speed in Oak Tree, or whatever it is. The slow technical corners is where the lap time is going to happen.
Exactly.
And if you get good there, you're more likely to get good on these faster corners later anyway.
The rest of them just come, right? Exactly. Exactly. So then we have this entire section you talked about here, and just to finish it, to polish it off, but we're you're 5 or 51, but let's call it 5/10, right? And by the time we made it through this little process and back up here to this next brake zone, 1.6, that's 1.1 seconds of time that the driver lost here. Here's your place to work, right? I mean, there's a lot low hanging fruit there ready to be picked. So
yep, absolutely. And so that's literally what we did, on that particular evening after we got done driving, is we went in and we did a lot of side-by-side video, and I went to the point of pulling my fastest segments and his fastest segments and so on and so forth.
It's kind of an interesting thing here. The red line is coming through here, and one of the parts of the graphs we haven't chatted too much about yet, but I wanted to make sure we got in here, is the yaw versus the steering. And it's a little hard to see because of two different drivers on here, but you've got this red line where you can see things moving a little bit here, right? And the boy, you throttle, he's trying to work the throttle here, trying to get back after it when he can. It's not taking it. And boy, this red line down here is the steering wheel angle. And you can see the driver is actually working it pretty hard. The car got pretty loose right in here. Is that what you see as well?
Well, so actually we set the car up to be just a touch on the understeery side, because in the enduro environment, it has a tendency to really eat the back tires off the car, just because of the way it delivers power and how long we need to run the tires. They're on the car for a good long time before we can change them. So that's just me sawing out the wheel to make the front end work. You'll see, some other places where you'll see me doing something different, but that's definitely not me catching the car. That's me just trying to get the car to get down in there. And what happens, you pick up it picks up a little push, and then you'll pull back and reset and pull back and reset, and just try to, and I'm doing the same thing with the throttle, right? Just tweak the throttle a little bit to get the car to kind of upset itself so I can get it to keep going around the corner. Again, that was a compromise we made in the settings of the car, in order to make it run better over a longer distance with the rear tire.
by getting it to rotate and having to give it a little wheel, you're able to actually get back to full throttle and go. But even with the other driver, taking a little bit of time here, the cars accelerate so well, and while you were dancing it around a little bit, he had to wait, and not that much speed here by the time they get to the next braking zone, right? In actual speed, but got through the middle of the corner pretty well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Anything else you like to chat about on that handling, the yaw versus steering?
Just one of the things, like if you happen to have yaw angle, it's a real quick, easy way, especially if you're not overlaying 2 laps. It's a quick, easy way to try to get some sort of, especially if you're not driving and you're just coaching, to get a handle on what the behavior of the car is. If your steering angle keeps increasing, but your yaw rate falls off, the car is a little understeery, and vice versa. If the steering angle stops increasing, right, but the yaw rate keeps going up, right, and the steering angle, then you can see the hands come off. You can see a correction down here, just where you're going there, Roger, towards the middle of turn 7, the toe. There's a correction being made coming off the as the hands are being unwound. That's really just a power oversteer scenario. Where back up in the carousel corner, you can see the car just has some steady state understeer. So most of the cars that I work with don't have yaw available necessarily. So usually I'm kind of extrapolating by overlaying lateral G, which is not as accurate. The yaw should basically mirror the steering angle when you're either under the limit or if you've got a well-balanced car.
And everybody see what he's talking about there with, and I'll zoom in on this particular one. The yaw comes up and it's pretty well steady after about where I've got the cursor, right? So he's turned in, he's got his hands are moving, he's got the car sitting there. Then he had to add a little bit more. It got a little understeery. He's added more of this yellow line, which means he turned the wheel more. The yaw did not change. So he's just asking for more. Come on, give me a little bit more. Take the nose down a little bit more. And then towards the apex of it, he really would have liked it to got down a little bit closer, probably missed the apex by a foot or so. Just he didn't really throw a bunch of wheel at it, just a little bit, and he was asking for even more, and then started to come off with his hands and exit the corner. You can see these progressions of him asking for more from the car, from the steering wheel. Interesting.
Okay. And the again, the other part of that is that and we might get to this later, when you're trying to work the setup of the car also to get it to jive with the driver, most of the time a car with just a teeny bit of understeer is way faster for most drivers than a car that's either dead neutral or a little loose.
Perfect. Interesting here that you also touched the brake just a tick there to maybe help it.
I needed to get that front down in there.
You were begging for that front end to work for you, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
You're using every tool you had available to you. Okay, so we went back to just a single car here, just to kind of walk our way through it, and then you've got gear position as kind of a final, just a sanity check against what the other driver's doing, and see if there's a couple corners where you might want to see what rolls better through a corner, right? And there is one little area here where the red driver downshifted once and the other driver didn't, but it went up here as well, but not a big difference.
Yeah, and actually that was something that we unfortunately didn't really get to explore. There was this idea that maybe we needed 6 gear on the back straightaway. I don't know. We never really got enough testing time to where I could analyze it. And then we were going back and forth on the final corner, turn 11, about whether or not we should click down to 3rd or just leave it in 4th. And I don't have the data from the second race, but the second race I was trying to do that corner in 4th just as an experiment so I could overlay that data. But unfortunately, it was raining when we were packing up and I didn't feel like getting it off the car.
When you do those kind of experiments, both here and if we look up here, you can see there isn't a huge difference, but you'd have to zoom in and I 1 or 2 laps. I mean, there's aero, there's all sorts of things that can make that happen. I really like to go out and do 4 or 5 laps doing a gear change in a certain way, and then 4 or 5 laps the other way, and being able to really get some decent enough data to really get a good view. Same thing on this end. The red line pardon me, has been relatively quick in the middle of the corner, and you were in this one as well, but not as much as of many of the other ones, and you downshifted, so maybe that was the difference there. It would need to have several laps of data to make sure which is right. So yeah,
exactly.
Pretty cool. The a couple of questions here as we to fit a few more in. Bruce asks, what kind of talking about endurance racing, what kind of conversation do you have as you're a coach, a driver, and then sometimes you're the team manager of the team, and other times, right? What kind of tire management in endurance racing? Is that a big thing? Is that something you have to worry about a ton? Some endurance races
So
only let you change one tire, some only two, all these
yeah,
things, right?
it depends on what series and what the rules are, and also what the team profile is, right? So I've raced in AER in everything from an 87 924 up to the M4 and E36s and E46s, so lots of stuff in between. And the tires over the course of the last 6 years have gone from pretty good to utterly exceptional, right? Some of these new 200 treadwear tires, you scratch your head and go, really? The last 200 treadwear tire would last all day. This one only goes half the day, right? So some of it is just a budgetary thing, right? If you've got a team that's trying to limit your corner speed and limit your tire budget, you're going to want to set the car up with a harder tire, right? And potentially do something to protect whatever tires typically gets worn out first, right? You've got a lower power car. A lot of times that's going to be the outside front at whatever given racetrack that is. You've got a higher power car. It's usually going to be the outside rear at whatever given racetrack that is. To me, the tire wear issue doesn't come so much as far as the driving is concerned, because I want my drivers to be able to drive basically as fast as they can without really abusing the car in an endurance environment. It comes with doing the vehicle setup in a way that's going to minimize the pain that you put on the tires. If you've got, especially in the street tire environment, if the car's too stiff in one way or another, it's just going to eat the tires off the car. Conversely, if it's too soft, it's going to eat the corner off the tire, right? Or if you get the alignment wrong, or, there's a lot of different tricks to get the tires to live. The primary one is, try to be neat and tidy. Not that you don't want no slip angle, but you don't want to be, big giant yaw moments, which aren't fast anyway. You want to just try to be neat and tidy. So the conversation I'd have with the drivers is, try not to abuse it, but don't go slow.
Yeah. Yeah, there. It's always a balance, right?
Yeah.
Couple more little driver coachy questions here. We've got a number of questions left that we weren't able to get to. That happens sometimes. I'll be asking Drew to help me answer the questions that were remaining. We'll fine tune the questions that were that we kind of covered as part of our discussion today. But we'll try to get to all these questions, and we'll have them as a question and answer document in the YouTube description. There's one here that I'd like to chat with you just really quick. How to determine in a slow to medium corner whether you should trail brake? How as you as a driver coach and you're chatting with somebody, different drivers, different things, different levels, I suppose. But when you talk about trail braking and to help the front end grip and get the thing to rotate and all the different things that happen, how do you kind of handle that situation with different drivers you coach?
So I think the answer is it's really dependent upon the shape of the corner and the setup on the car. For the most part, again, if you go look at data that comes out of a professional driver, right, what you'll see is their brake zone tends to start in the same place as your typical fast club racer, but it tends to end later and it tends to taper earlier. So they're almost always trail braking the car, but they're using a lot less brake in the final portion of the trail brake. Your typical, fast club environment driver tends to overuse the trail braking, right? So there's too much brake towards the end. Okay. And so that driver will typically benefit from a faster release or an earlier release because they have a tendency to overwhelm the front of the car. And then the other part of it is just simply some car and tire combinations, they don't like mixed vectors, right? So sometimes you just need to get the foot off because the car won't turn without it, especially again, in the street tire scenario. The treaded tires I find really, really don't like to be sort of pivoted around the outside front tire like you can do with a fresh racing slick.
A lot of sidewall flex, all sorts of things that are part of that, right? So, and the type of car.
Yeah, I think with the treaded tires, the friction circle tends to not be round, right?
It is not.
No,
the circle is not a circle.
It is not. It's
and one more from Andy Whittle. I'm going to take it as a bit of a humorous take and a way that I would answer this question, or at least chat about it. But what do you do when you realize the car is junk and the, the driver's simply trying to stay alive and drive around the bad car. Endurance racing, sometimes your previous driver, you would never do it. Your previous driver maybe has had a couple of offs, and all the four wheels are not pointing the right way, and yet you got to make some laps until you can get to the finish line. What do you do when the car is that way? You're driving on the mirror. You do the best you can. What do you do, right?
Well, you've got basically two questions there. One is, what do you do when the car has turned to junk, right? Which is just try to survive and keep it out of the wall, right? That's slow down, check your mirrors, don't do anything silly. The flip side is this question here, where if you've got a car that's just garbage, where I've just arrived and this guy is doing a good job of not killing himself, I applaud him for his car control skills, and then we go work on the car.
There you go. And you always have that deal where endurance racing is such that you might be in the fastest class, as you described a little bit earlier, and there's other times you got a really good handling car, but you are in your car is doesn't put out nearly the lap time, right? But it's a good car. Spec Miata maybe is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're having to drive those mirrors in endurance racing as much as out the front. Your job is to get as much lap time as you can out of it as fast as you can, and you're racing in your class, and yet you got guys catching you at crazy rates. So you've got a whole dynamic of you're the fast guy sometimes, and sometimes you're the slow guy, and you really got a different mindset while you're in the car. It's kind of crazy in endurance racing. So have you been you've done the other end as well, right? You're talking about being your car that you run now is a fairly fast car. You've been in some of the, they're good cars, but their lap time is just slower, and you got to watch behind you a little bit. That's a whole different dynamic to try to drive, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I've been, down towards the bottom of the speed, scenario where we've got, again, a bunch of good drivers driving a relatively low powered, low grip car, and we are wheeling that thing. And, you can get your butt handed to you by a slightly better car that happens to be in the same class with a worse driver.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I try to treat endurance racing a little bit like Formula One drivers treat Formula One, right? We're racing, I don't want to say against our teammates, we're racing with our teammates, because the only people we can really beat is ourselves, right? If we execute well, we'll get rewarded with a reasonably good finishing position. I don't have any control over what other teams are doing.
Yeah, you're going to get the best you can get out of it. That's really what your goal is, right?
Yeah. I would say the primary thing that I use as a tool when we're doing that kind of stuff also, because it's the thing that gets missed most often. We were talking about video before. The one thing that drivers are really, really, really easy to show them is when they're not using all the road and they're not necessarily aware of it. You cheating corner entries, for instance, right?
Yeah.
That's typically the primary thing that I'm going to see in between, those kinds of drivers.
Perfect. That was actually one of the data analysis topics I was going to have you look at it. And I actually noticed that in the data, but I didn't, we just didn't have the time. We'll bring you back, and we'll do a little bit more. I'll never forget, I was at a 25-hour endurance race at Thunder Hill, and there were Spec Miatas. Now they're not the slowest of the cars that are out there, but they run forever, and there's a bunch of them. And then, so you'd have 15 of those circulating. And then there was two high-end endurance race cars, a Daytona prototype and a factory-backed Porsche that was out there, right? It was getting some time in before they were going to go race, the 24 hours of Daytona. And to see that Daytona prototypes and that Porsche with factory Porsche drivers running around and catching the same cars, these same Spec Miatas, every 5 or 6 laps, it seemed like, right? I mean, what a good training ground for understanding traffic and such. So I remember Mark Miller talked about it. In racing and professional level, you end up running around, but a lot of the drivers you're working with, right? You see out on the track, and you go to an amateur endurance race like Thunder, like the Thunder Hill event, and VIR has the endurance races in New Jersey, a lot of them around. And now all of a sudden there's drivers that are moving around. You don't even know the car, let alone the 5 drivers that are driving it, right? Who's in it? You don't have that background with them, so you're having to really become very good about picking your way through traffic. It's kind of a good tool to learn. So
that's definitely a subject for next time.
Exactly, endurance racing. It's just such a blast. I appreciate it, Drew. We're out of time, but we had a few questions left. Again, we'll get those kind of things figured out, and we'll put all the questions and answers into our YouTube document in the YouTube description, and we'll get as much of that as we can as fast as we can. all of our videos that we do, all of our webinars, plus a whole bunch of other previous videos we've done are currently out on our YouTube site. This one will be there within an hour or so. This one will be number 159 that we will have out there. Go visit us on our YouTube site. Just go to YouTube, type in AIM data, and you'll find us and take a look at all the stuff that we got out there. Tons of good information. A lot of other AIM coaches and dealers have web YouTube pages as well. James Colburn comes to mind, has got a lot of good videos out there. So go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff that we've got. We're a customer support company that happens to sell electronics. It's something we like to say, and that's why we love to partner up with guys like Drew that just love to teach people and help and work things around with people. And we're here to help you. Drew's here to help you. We'll have some contact info for him in a second. Give us a call if you're at the track and don't see us, or if you're at the track, find us in our Sprinter vans and our backpacks walking around. Ask us for some help. Give us a call. We're always here to help you get the most out of the equipment you've invested into. So we have an interesting one, and actually I saw him here in the chat a little bit earlier. Next week we're going to something that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and we've had a couple of them, but we have just a ton of gauges in the karting world, and a big part of that, big segment of that is oval track racing, dirt oval even. And we're gonna have a guest next weekend next Tuesday, a week from today. David Smith is gonna come join us from Kart Speed Solutions, and been really looking forward to this. David has taken his game to a whole nother level. He's a racer in karting, and been using data for a long time, and now his kids are racing, and we've been chatting for at least a couple of years, and he has learned so much, and he's innovative with some of the stuff that he's coming up with to help kart racers go faster in circles. I just let you know, we have lots of guys here that are road racers and kart racers of asphalt variety and sprint racing and other things. I suspect you might want to join us as we chat, as I've chat with David a lot. All the same tools we do, he uses. And but he has to take them to a different level, and I think everybody will find some pretty interesting things, even though it's dirt oval and he's looking at certain channels doing certain things. But he has to really watch it, because boy, he's looking for a 10th on the entire lap. A 10th on the entire lap is game changing in their world. So he has found some ways to really look at lateral G's and steering and some other things that I think is of value to everybody, but of course to our dirt kart oval folks that we're hoping to get a lot more people coming in here and joining us. So look forward to next week and chatting with David about the data that he's going to show us and the processes and the things he's doing. So that'll be fun. So kind of rolling this one close, Drew, I have really appreciated. I know this is the busy time for everybody with the COVID deal in 2020. The 2020, a lot of folks didn't race as much as maybe they wanted, and then we have all gotten hit when spring has gotten here. So I know it's extra hard to get folks like you and some of the guests that we've had. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. We had a great time. You filled in a lot of great holes and talked a lot about some pretty cool stuff. So I appreciate you being here. Is there anything you'd like to kind of add as we kind of close this up?
No, I think just thanks for having me, and look forward to the next one, and also watching the next one, even though I'm not going to be in it. I think these are super valuable for the especially the club racers, right, and the advanced track day folks, because it's insight that they don't normally get to see on how to use various tools. And again, this is how I started in this business. Was I just happened to be there when these tools became sort of available to people like me.
Perfect. And we're inviting you back now, so hopefully maybe in 2 or 3 months, something like that, when we'll come back and kind of take where we kind of are here and take it to the next level of some other cool stuff that you're doing. So I appreciate it. Hope you can come back and join us. There's some contact information for Drew. His company's Tachterion Driver Development. Maybe next time we'll actually talk about how you came up with what does Tachterion mean. We'll talk about that next time. We'll leave that as a bit of a hook. And then there's his email address, the website, and a phone number to contact him if you have any other questions about some of the stuff we talked about today or looking for some services. So appreciate it again, Drew. It's been a great time. Thanks to all our AIM guys in the background that have been helping us out with the questions in the chat box. I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing everybody here again next Tuesday. Thanks everybody for coming.